Bigger public sector, more equal society and faster growth, all just by collecting more tax.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Richard. And we're economists.
Max has sent us a voice memo with his question. Let's have a listen.
What is the point of taxation if not to fund spending?
Well, that's a big question. What is the point of taxation if not to fund spending?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so if I want to fund my lunch or fund buying a car or fund buying a house, I can either stockpile cash under my mattress in a bank account, or I can go to a bank or another institution or maybe my parents and say, can you lend me some money so I can fund this purchase? So we use the word fund when we talk to each other to suggest where will the money come from. But governments, local governments and state governments, they've got the same constraints, but national governments, well, they've got something special. Matt, what's so special about a national government like Australia?
They're the only ones in Australia, the federal government, the national government, that can print their own money.
Print their own cash.
Yeah, they can create as much money or as little money as they like.
So if a government wanted to fund the purchase of, I don't know, a renewable energy rollout or an enormous fleet of tanks, they could fund it by cash they'd kind of stockpiled before. They could borrow money off me or a bank, or you're saying they could just print the money themselves.
Yep, they could just print it. So what you're saying, Richard, is there's no constraint the government has at all.
Right, but so when governments can fund a purchase, they can actually hand over cash that they print themselves. It's really important to understand that governments can't print an infinite amount of money. So we have to be careful with language here. A lot of people get very uptight and say governments don't need to fund anything, they can always print money. But in reality, governments need to accumulate resources from the real economy, and they usually do that by collecting tax from me, you, and companies.
So what you're saying, Richard, is that the constraint isn't how much money you have, like it is with you and me. The constraint for the national government is how much of the real economy, or how big the real economy is. That's their actual constraint.
Exactly. So governments don't ever, quote, run out of money. I can run out of money, you can run out of money. The government can always print more money. But if governments just print money all the time, then the value of money would collapse. So when we have a conversation about how will the government fund the health system or fund the NDIS or fund any large government spending over the coming decades, it's important to note that they don't literally ever need to find some cash, but they can't just spend enormous amounts of money without actually running down the value of money, and that's called inflation. So what governments typically do is collect revenue from taxes, which effectively takes resources off me, takes resources off Matt. So if I'm paying more tax, I go and buy less stuff in the shops. That frees up resources for the government to go and buy more aged care or buy more childcare or buy more disability services. So
if you think about the economy as a big pie, taxation allows the government to go in and take a slice of that pie.
That's right.
And the more they tax, the larger the slice of the real economy that they can take.
Yeah, and I think, Matt, you've prepared some data on this exact point.
I have. So what we have here are OECD countries.
And OECD means rich countries, right?
Yep, so they're the rich countries of the world. So each country is a blue dot.
So this is a country, this is a country, this is a country, and this is a country.
Yep, and what we have here is the level of taxation that the countries do. So tax as a percentage of GDP.
So this country up here, 45% of national income,
yep,
getting collected in tax.
Whereas down here it's only 20%. So the higher up you are this side, the more you tax. And on this side we have spending as a percentage of GDP.
So some countries collect more tax than others, some countries spend more than others.
Yep.
Matt, is there a relationship between the two?
There is a very strong relationship, as shown by the black line. That is, countries that tax very little also tend to spend very little. They have smaller public services, they have less government services. Whereas countries that collect a lot of tax tend to be countries that also spend a lot, that provide a lot of government services.
So Matt, could this country that doesn't collect much tax have a really big public sector?
It could in the short term, but what would be happening is they wouldn't be taking much out of the private sector. They wouldn't be carving out much for the public sector to provide.
So the tax would only be taking out a little bit of the pie, but they're trying to eat a lot of pie.
Yeah, and that would cause inflation eventually.
So in the short term, there's no constraint. The government could spend more, but it's no accident that the countries that collect a lot, that don't collect much tax, aren't spending a lot. And here up here, we've got countries collecting a lot of tax and spending a lot.
Yeah, so to go back to the original question, what's the point of taxation if not to fund? Well, it's basically in order to provide more government spending, more government service. If you want a country, if you want to set your country up as one that provides a lot of government services, then you should tax. You should increase your tax. If you want your country set up to provide few government services, then you can lower your taxes.
So to be clear, what the tax is doing is making room for big public sector spending. And the more tax they collect, in the long run, the bigger public sector they can have.
And also, Richard, I have another reason why you might want to tax. And I have some other data here. So this now is again the same on this axis. We have tax as a percentage of GDP, how much tax. So the
this
further
is a
up,
high tax country?
Yep, so these are high tax countries, these are low tax countries. But on the bottom here, I have a thing called the Gini coefficient.
Well, that sounds fancy.
Yeah, look, the Gini coefficient basically just measures how much inequality there are. So the higher the Gini coefficient is, the more inequality we have in a country.
So this is unequal.
Yep.
And this is more equal.
That's right. And so again, we have quite a strong relationship. That is, countries that tax a lot also have little inequality. Countries that tax less have more inequality.
So what's the point of tax? It not only makes room for public spending in the economy, but because tax usually redistributes, people who earn the most pay the most tax, collecting the tax is simultaneously reducing inequality in the country.
That's right. And lower levels of inequality, we found, are allow economies to grow faster. That is, countries that are more equal tend to grow faster than countries that are less equal.
So win-win.
Win-win.
Win-win-win.
Yeah. So
bigger public sector, more equal society, and faster growth, all just by collecting more tax.
That's exactly right. So what's the point of taxation? Well, it reduces inequality and it creates space for government spending.
Wow, sounds like tax is a good thing.
If you want to ask a question, leave it in the comments below or send us an email at mail@australiainstitute.org.au with Ask an Economist in the subject line.
At the Australia Institute, our goal is to provide you with the facts and knowledge so that you can participate confidently in the debate and push back against all the nonsense and econobabble that's out there. If you want to help spread the truth, share this video to a friend or via your social media and help us get the word out. And subscribe to our channel to keep updated with the latest research and analysis.